Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed at 1,000 subscribers. I'll be posting a special video. My husband slid a plate in front of me and I actually flinched. It was not a joke flinch, more like my body ducked first. I'm Emily and I remember that jolt more than the eggs. Back then I did not know this was the start of everything. The bed beside me was empty when I reached across the sheet. He never beats my alarm out of habit and I felt a prickle. I checked my phone and saw I had slept late for once. No messages from him, just the distant clatter from the kitchen. I walked down the hall and the clatter turned into fast, deliberate movement. He stood at the stove with a focus I usually only saw on his laptop. He looked up when he heard me and his whole face brightened too quickly. "Good morning, babe," he called out with a voice like some commercial. My brain did that slow lag thing where you know something is off before you name it. He never cooks breakfast on weekdays, and suddenly there was a whole plate waiting. He wiped his hands on a towel and pulled my chair out like we were dating again. I sat because refusing the gesture felt bigger than accepting it, and I was not ready. The plate looked normal enough, but my fingers curled around the fork like it might bite. He watched me sit there and his smile started to tremble at the edges. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the food. I scanned the room for flowers or balloons or something to explain this performance. "Yeah," I said, and my voice came out thin and papery. I am 32 and my husband making breakfast still feels like a prank. He pushed the plate closer and told me to eat before it got cold. I lifted the fork, then set it down again because I needed one straight answer first. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the food. He laughed once and ran a hand through his hair like this was adorable. "Making breakfast for my wife," he said with his forced light tone. "Since when?" I asked, and that landed heavier than I meant. He blinked like he had not prepared for that follow-up. "I can't do something nice without it being weird." His smile twitched at the edges and his eyes never left my face. The whole thing felt rehearsed and shaky at the same time and my chest buzzed. Normally he would be glancing at his phone by now or checking the clock. That morning he just stood there and studied me like I was the news. "How did you sleep?" he asked using that slow, careful tone. He never asks that and the words felt too big for the room. "Fine," I said, though my brain wanted to say guess why it was not. "Nightmares again," I added just to see if he noticed that word. His eyes flickered and then he stepped closer like that tiny detail hurt. "I hate that you still get those," he said and his voice dropped. He reached for my wrist, then stopped halfway like he was asking silently first. I let him touch me and the contact felt careful in a way that stung. "I want you to sleep better," he whispered, thumb brushing my skin once. It sounded sweet if you ignore the history, but my nerves would not ignore it. I pulled my hand back and stupidly, the first thought I had was cancer. People act like this when they get bad news and try to fix everything fast. Then my brain jumped to an affair and I felt my teeth press together. Either way, there had to be a reason, and I hated not knowing which disaster fit. His phone buzzed on the counter and he moved faster than the sound reached me. He flipped it over face down and forced a grin like nothing had happened at all. I watched his jaw clench for a second before he relaxed again too deliberately. "Spam," he said, waving one hand as if that explained what I had just seen. I finally took a bite because my mind needed something to do besides spin theories. It tasted good and I hated that because it gave him this hopeful look. "You like it?" he asked, leaning closer on his elbows like a kid waiting on praise. That hungry shine in his eyes felt new and I did not trust new. "Yeah, it's good," I answered because saying anything deeper felt like walking on a trapdoor. He relaxed a fraction and let out this little breath like he had passed a test. In that moment I realized I was not the only one scared of something unnamed. Whatever had changed him did not feel small and I was not sure I wanted it. After a few more bites I pushed back my chair and told him I needed the bathroom. He nodded quickly and started clearing the table even though I was not finished. In the mirror I looked the same as always, but the morning did not. I gripped the sink and tried to slow my breathing because my life felt tilted. When I walked back out, he was wiping the counter in tight little circles and humming off key. He glanced up like a guilty teenager and asked if I needed anything else today. I told him I had errands just to create distance because my head was too loud. As I grabbed my keys, he stepped in for a hug, and I knew this was not random. His arms closed around me gently and he held on. Longer than usual. Up close, he smelled different, cleaner, like he had scrubbed himself of something I had not seen. I stood stiff in that embrace and counted 3 breaths before I let myself melt. That morning, my husband felt like a stranger who remembered my name, and I was not sure it meant love or fear. He kicked the door shut with his heel and tugged my wrist toward the hallway. His work badge still hung around his neck, keys still in his hand. "Come on," he murmured against my hair, already steering me toward the bedroom. There was no question in that grip, only expectation, and I went along because that was easier. Back then I told myself it was normal couple stuff, just a busy marriage. He dropped his things on the dresser and reached for my waistband like we were on a timer. I opened my mouth to mention my headache, then watched his face and swallowed the excuse. I climbed onto the mattress and tried to keep my brain quiet enough to get through it. He pressed his weight over me and moved fast like there was a clock running. He did not look at my face, just at where our bodies met. I focused on counting slow breaths and watching a crack in the ceiling. Now, thinking back, the worst part is that I knew exactly when he would be done. He finished, rolled away, and reached for his phone with one smooth motion. "You're still on birth control, right?" he asked while scanning his notifications. I pulled the sheet over my chest and nodded even though my throat felt tight. He grunted something that was probably thanks and swung his feet to the floor. Later that week, different night, exact same script. I was curled up with a show when he dropped onto the couch beside me. His hand slid under my shirt before he even glanced at the screen. "Pause that," he said, already pulling me closer like my body was the remote. "I'm tired," I whispered, eyes on the glowing television. "You barely did anything today," he muttered, thumb dragging over my stomach. That sentence still hits me harder than I want to admit. I laughed weakly, killed the sound, and let my body fall into the shape he liked. I used to joke that I had a second job after dark. Clock in when he walked through the door, clock out when he rolled over. If I hesitated, he would sigh and ask if I still found him attractive. I would rush to reassure him while ignoring the way my own chest burned. Once, I tried to bring it up without using the word sex at all. We were in the car and I picked a red light like it was safe ground. "I wish we cuddled more," I blurted, fingers knotting in my lap. He squinted at the traffic, then shrugged and said, "You know I show love physically." "Yeah, but it feels like that is the only lane we have." He drummed his thumb on the steering wheel and glanced at the clock. "Look, I work all day, I miss you, of course I want you when I get home." The light turned green, and that conversation died so fast I felt stupid for starting it. After that, I stopped trying to find softer words. Whenever he reached for me, I treated it like brushing my teeth. Necessary, scheduled, unremarkable, something you handle even when you feel like garbage. If I cried in the shower later, I told myself it was just stress. There was one night that still makes my stomach twist when I remember the exact beats. I had cramps so sharp I could barely stand upright. He climbed into bed, slid his hand under the blanket, and I grabbed his wrist. "Not tonight," I whispered, pressing my knees together like that could help. He froze, then pulled back slowly, jaw tight. Again, he scoffed, rolling onto his back with a heavy sigh. "You always have something going on when I'm in the mood." I stared at the dark ceiling and tried not to apologize for my own pain. He did not touch me that night, but the silence felt like a punishment. The next evening he was extra handsy, as if making up for lost time. He dragged me into the bedroom before dinner, grip firm on my waist. My body obeyed, but my mind stayed stuck on the way he had said again. I started managing his mood like it was a weather app only I could see. If he came home upbeat, I braced for him to reach for me. If he walked in grumpy, I braced harder because then it felt like pressure and proof. Some nights I gave in just to avoid the cold distance that lingered when I refused. There was a small moment that should have told me more than it did. We were at a friend's barbecue and someone joked about married sex drying up. He glanced at me, smirked, and tapped my hip with 2 fingers. "Not our problem," he bragged, and everyone laughed while my face burned. On the drive home, he rested his hand high on my thigh and squeezed. "You like that, right?" he asked, sounding pleased with himself. I stared out the window and forced out a light chuckle. In my chest, something sagged because what he meant was, "Look how available you are." I started dodging casual touches during the day. Why, without really noticing at first. If he hugged me from behind while I washed dishes, my shoulders went rigid. If he kissed my neck, I stepped away to grab something and broke the moment. I knew that any contact could turn into a request, and my body flinched in advance. When friends asked how things were between us, I always answered fast. We're good, busy, you know how it is. That line rolled off my tongue so easily it scared me. I never added that my stomach dropped every time he closed the bedroom door. The strange part is that he never called it sex in a harsh way. He used sweet words, pet names, gentle tones on top of the same pattern. Come here, gorgeous, while nudging me flat and nudging my legs apart. It sounded loving if you did not notice how little room there was for no. Back then, I thought I was being dramatic for even noticing. Other people had worse, right? So who was I to complain? I convinced myself that this was just marriage and that I was oversensitive. I told myself that enough times that my own body eventually stopped arguing out loud. From the outside, we probably looked affectionate and close. He touched me often, kissed my cheek, wrapped an arm around my shoulders in public. Inside, every hand on my skin came with an invisible question I was tired of answering. By the time that breakfast morning came, I had already learned how to leave myself while staying in the room. His hand slid under the blanket and I caught his wrist. I did it fast without thinking and both of us froze. The room felt small and loud even though nothing actually moved. Stop, I said, and my own voice sounded like someone else. He stared at me in the dark like he was waiting for a punchline. His fingers flexed once against my grip as if testing my resolve. What's wrong? He asked, low and already a little irritated. My head is pounding, I whispered, though that was only half true. He pulled his hand free and pushed himself up on one elbow. You were fine a minute ago, he muttered, breath hot on my face. I had been scrolling my phone and pretending not to see him watching. Yeah, well, I'm not fine now, I said, and my chest thudded. He exhaled hard and clicked his tongue like I had messed up a plan. You know I have to get up early, he complained, rubbing his forehead. Then you should sleep, I answered, clinging to the thin edge of calm. Silence sat between us, and I could feel it getting heavier. You always say that lately, he finally said, shifting beside me. I turned on my side and stared at the wall so he could not read my face. Lately, I repeated because that word dug under my skin. He laughed without humor and the sound felt mean in the dark. Seriously, what is going on with you? He asked, blanket bunching at his waist. You barely ever want to anymore unless I practically drag you. Every word landed like he was listing unpaid bills with my name on them. I could feel my fingernails pressing into my palms under the covers. For a second, I almost caved like every other night. My brain started lining up the usual excuses just to keep peace. Then something inside me tripped over itself and refused to move. I'm not a vending machine, I blurted, and that surprised both of us. He let out a short, disbelieving snort. Nobody said you were a vending machine, he argued, shoulders tensing. I just want to be close to my wife, he added, voice suddenly softer. He always ran to that line when he wanted me to back down. You want to be close for 10 minutes, I snapped, heat rushing to my face. After that you roll over and grab your phone. He flinched at that detail like I had tugged a thread he thought hidden. Wow, he said, rolling onto his back, guess you keep score now. The mattress dipped and my body slid toward him out of habit. I shoved my heel down and braced myself to stay put. I'm tired of feeling like that's all I'm here for, I said. The words trembled, but they were out and I could not grab them back. He turned his head toward me and I felt his stare even in the dark. All you're here for, he repeated slowly like he needed to taste it. So what, you think I only want you for sex? He spit that last word out like it made me ridiculous. I swallowed and felt my throat burn. You don't ask about my day, you don't listen when I talk. You come home, you eat, and then you reach for me like a button. I feel like I exist just to spread my legs when you feel like it. The sentence hung in the air and even I wanted to reel it back. His whole body went still as if I had slapped him without touching him. Wow, he said again, but this time it was quiet and ugly. So that's what you think of me. He sat up and swung his feet to the floor. The mattress jerked and my body rocked toward the empty space. I'm your husband, he said, dragging both hands over his face. Wanting my wife is not some crime. Wanting isn't the problem, I ans. Word sitting up too with the blanket clutched tight. Acting like you are owed my body every night is the problem. My pulse throbbed in my ears and I could hear my breathing. I hated how my voice shook because it made me feel 13. He stood and paced at the foot of the bed, short, restless steps. So I'm a monster now, he snapped, arms cutting through the air. Do you hear yourself right now? My stomach twisted, but I kept my gaze on his outline. I'm telling you how I feel, I managed, fingers locked around the blanket edge. You keep reaching for me, and I keep disappearing inside myself. He stopped pacing at that, and I knew the words landed. Now looking back, that particular sentence still stings me too. He walked to his dresser, then walked back like he had nowhere to put his anger. So what are you saying, he asked, breathing hard, you want a sexless marriage? I let out a small humorless laugh that sounded wrong even to my ears. I want a marriage where I matter when you're not turned on. He barked out a rough sound that might have been a laugh. That is not fair, he argued, pointing a finger toward the bed. You act like I never do anything for us. In that moment, I remembered that breakfast was still in the future. He dropped his hand and stared at the floor. Other guys would be thrilled if their wife still attracted them, he muttered. I stared at him and felt something inside me clench hard. You keep talking about what other guys would think, not about me. His shoulders jerked like that hit a nerve he did not expect me to touch. Oh, so now I'm some selfish pig, he fired back, voice rising. Do you know how many men complain their wives never want them? I sat very still because I could feel the argument slipping somewhere darker. I know at least one woman who feels used, I said, and my chest ached. The silence after that was thick and hot and impossible to breathe through. He shook his head slowly like he did not recognize the person in front of him. Where is this even coming from tonight? He asked, almost bewildered. From every time I went along just to keep you happy, I answered. From every time you pushed for it when I was exhausted. I'm not proud of how my voice cracked on that last word. My body is tired of bribing you with itself so you stay pleasant. His expression shifted so fast it almost made me dizzy. Annoyance, shock, something close to hurt all flashed across his face. You think I only treat you well when we screw? He asked. He used the blunt word like it might scare me into backing up. You treat me fine, I said, and my throat closed around the word fine. But you only really light up when you get what you want in bed. He opened his mouth, then shut it again and looked away. That tiny pause felt worse than if he had yelled. He grabbed the spare pillow from the chair and tucked it under his arm. Clearly nothing I do counts for you right now, he said, voice sharp and flat. I am not going to beg my own wife for intimacy. He marched toward the doorway and every step sounded like an accusation. My heart jumped into my mouth. Where are you going? I asked, though I already knew. He stopped in the doorway without turning around. I'm not sleeping next to someone who thinks I'm using her, he answered. Then he walked out and the sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. The click of the living room lamp reached me a few seconds later. I sat in the dark, blanket pulled to my chin, whole body buzzing. I had finally said no, and it felt like I had thrown a grenade. I lay back, stared at the dim ceiling, and tried to breathe evenly. Every few minutes I heard the couch springs creak as he shifted his weight. I thought about going out there and apologizing just to end the tension. My legs would not move because I knew I would lose myself again. At some point I grabbed my phone and opened a search bar. I typed a question about feeling obligated and deleted it 3 times. The words looked dramatic every time I saw them in that little box. I locked the screen and pressed it against my chest like some weak shield. My mind ran through every time I had smiled and gone along. For a second I wondered if I had been lying to him by pretending. Then I felt this sharp unfairness that he got my body and my guilt. That mix of shame and anger made my eyes sting harder. From the living room, I heard the volume on the television jump. He was flipping through channels loudly, which he only did when sulking. The childishness of it almost made me laugh, almost. Instead, I buried my face in the pillow to muffle a sob. I must have drifted a little because the next sound startled me. Soft footsteps in the hallway, then a pause right outside the bedroom. The door stayed cracked, which somehow felt worse than if he had slammed it. Are you awake? His voice floated in low and tired. My whole body went rigid. Yeah, I answered. Barely louder than a breath. He inched the door open a bit more but did not cross the threshold. Can we talk without you attacking me again? He asked. That line made something cold press against my ribs. I wasn't attacking you, I said, sitting up. I was telling you I'm hurt. He rubbed at his face like he wanted to erase the last hour. Look, I get that you're upset, he started, then faltered. I just feel blindsided, he continued after a heartbeat, hands on his hips. I come in here to be close to my wife and suddenly I'm a villain. He looked at the wall behind me instead of my eyes. If you felt this way, why didn't you say something before tonight? I almost laughed at that because it sounded ridiculous out loud. I have tried, I said, fingers twisting in the sheet. You brushed it off. Tonight I couldn't swallow it again and act like everything was normal. My voice got louder on that last word and I saw his jaw tighten. I don't want to hurt you, he answered, finally meeting my gaze. I just want us to feel connected, and lately you push me away. I swallowed and thought about all the times I had left my own body. Maybe I push you away because I'm trying not to disappear completely. That sentence landed between us and sat there, heavy and undeniable. He closed his eyes for a second and let out a long breath. I never meant to make you feel like an object, he said quietly. I thought you understood that this is how I show affection. I hear that, I replied, and I did on some level. But you need to understand that I felt like a service, not a partner. Saying it that plainly made my stomach lurch. This can't keep happening like this, not if you actually care. He leaned against the doorframe and looked smaller than usual. Are you saying you don't want me at all? He asked, voice rougher. The scared note under the anger almost pulled me off the bed. No, I answered, I'm saying I want you to want more than access. His throat bobbed and he nodded once, like that hurt but made sense. Okay, he whispered, fingers tapping against the wood, I will try. Then he shook his head and added, but you really crushed me tonight. That line twisted my guilt and my relief into a tight knot. He turned away again and I thought he was heading back to the couch. Instead he walked to the linen closet and dragged out a spare blanket. He spread it on the floor on his side of the bed. I'll sleep here, he announced, you clearly need space from me. The sight of him making a pallet on the floor hit me strangely. Part of me thought he was punishing me with a dramatic gesture. Another part saw a man refused for the first time in flailing. I shifted toward the edge of the mattress and watched him lie down. Good night, he muttered into the dark. It sounded nothing like a good night. Good night, I echoed, voice uneven, heart racing faster than it should. We lay there inches apart and miles away. Looking back, that was the first night my no stayed a no. I did not backtrack, I did not slide off the bed to comfort him. I let him sit with the idea that my body was not automatic anymore. I did not realize yet how much that one word would scare him. His phone buzzed on the bathroom counter and my spine went stiff. Water pounded behind the shower curtain and he started humming off key. The screen lit up with his friend's name and a preview I could not read. My hand moved before my brain caught up and hovered over the glass. I yanked it back like I had touched a hot stove. I am not proud of that first impulse, but it was there. All week he had been on this strange kindness tour and my nerves were fried. That vibration felt like a string tied straight to my gut. 2 days earlier he had folded my laundry without being asked. He stacked everything neatly and joked about finally learning how to help. An hour later I heard him in the kitchen watching some video on marriage. It sounded sweet on paper, living with it felt like standing under a spotlight. He started texting me in the middle of the day with heart emojis. Random messages like thinking about you and how's my favorite girl doing. That might sound adorable if you ignore the years before. To me it felt like someone spamming a broken account. The shower cut off for a second, then turned back on stronger. He was rinsing his hair, which meant I had maybe 2 minutes. Another message flashed on the lock screen and my heartbeat tripped. I told myself I just needed to know if this change was real. I picked up the phone and felt my palms slick up fast. I knew the passcode because we used to swap playlists on road trips. My thumb hit the numbers while my conscience screamed in the background. The home screen jumped open and my stomach rolled hard. The Messages app sat right there, unread badge glowing bright. I tapped his friend's name and a fresh line popped up at the bottom. Dude, I think I really screw. Yet up with her. My breath hitched and I scrolled up, chasing the beginning. The thread from that morning was short and jagged. She flipped out last night about sex. Said I'd treat her like that's all she's good for. My eyes burned and I felt my fingers tightening around the phone. His friend had answered with a string of stunned reactions. Then guess you pushed too hard, man, you know how women are. My jaw locked so tight my teeth hurt. They were discussing my pain like a minor inconvenience. Keep going, I told myself, knowing this was already too much. Earlier messages filled the screen in a messy staircase of bubbles. She barely wants it lately, drives me insane. Feels like I married a roommate with benefits. I read that line twice because my brain refused to absorb it. Roommate with benefits. He had put our entire marriage into that little joke. I could practically hear him chuckling while he typed. Further up, the tone shifted from irritated to something more reckless. There was a string of messages from a week before my first no. Met this girl after work, she actually flirts back. If I wasn't married, I'd be all over that. I kept scrolling, hands shaking harder with each swipe. His friend had responded with predictable encouragement and trashy emojis. You're not dead just because you got a ring, live a little. My chest felt tight enough that I had to breathe through my mouth. Then I hit the part that made the room tilt a little. Almost went home with her last night. We were at the bar until closing, she kept touching my arm. Would have done it if she hadn't bylaid last minute. I read that one 3 times in a row. My vision tunneled and the letters started to blur around the edges. So that was it, not some vague fear but a near miss. He had stood close enough to cheating that a stranger's choice saved our marriage. There were more lines below that, his tone suddenly nervous. Kind of scared me honestly, made me realize how far I was about to go. Need to get my act together before I lose everything. The timestamp on that message sat right above the date of his sudden sweetness. That detail hit me harder than any insult in the thread. His guilt came first, then the breakfast in the careful hands. The tenderness I had been trying to trust started looking like damage control. I felt something inside me sag and sharpen at the same time. The shower shut off with a hollow clunk and my body jolted. Steam rolled under the bathroom door and his humming stopped. I scanned the screen one last time, heart banging against my ribs. My thumb fumbled until I backed out of the thread and locked the phone. I set it down exactly where it had been, face up at the same angle. Then I stepped back and leaned on the doorway like I had just walked by. Water dripped from the curtain rod and the fan buzzed overhead. I forced my breathing to slow so it would not give me away. The door swung open and he stepped out with a towel slung low. He jumped a little when he saw me in the hall. Hey, he smiled, adjusting the towel, you scared me for a second. His eyes flicked to the counter and back so fast most people would miss it. Your phone's been going off, I said, pointing with my chin. I watched his face carefully while I kept my tone flat. He grabbed it quickly and flipped it over in his hand. Just Mark, he muttered, thumb moving across the screen in a blur. He typed something fast and his shoulders relaxed as he hit send. Then he looked up with that new soft expression that I no longer trusted. You okay? He asked, stepping closer. You look pale. The concern in his voice sounded real and that almost made it worse. I'm fine, I answered because I was not ready to blow everything open. My voice came out steady and that felt like a small talent. He reached for my hip with his free hand and pulled me into a damp hug. I let my arms hover uselessly at my sides for a beat too long. He noticed, of course he noticed, then squeezed tighter like he could fix it with pressure. Thank you for last night, he murmured into my hair. Thank you for being honest with me, I needed that wake-up call. I stared over his shoulder and wondered which part he was thanking me for. Later that day he sent another sweet text while I was out running errands. Lunch on me tonight, I want to make it special. Seeing his name pop up made my stomach dip instead of flutter now. Every nice gesture felt stapled to the words almost went home with her. At dinner he watched my face like a man studying exam results. How's the food? He asked, fingers tapping the table. Anything you want different? I forced a smile and said it was great while my mind replayed the chat. He was acting like a husband in some couple's commercial and I knew why. He reached across and laced his fingers with mine again. I know I messed up with how I treated you, he said quietly. I just want you to feel wanted and safe from no. W on. The phrases sounded pretty, but I could still see the lines on that screen. That night when he crawled into bed, he moved differently. He lay on his back and waited instead of reaching automatically. If you want to just sleep, that's totally okay, he whispered. The patience in his voice made my skin prickle because it had a timestamp. I lay there listening to his careful breathing and the quiet house. Every part of me knew something big had shifted between us. He thought he was rebuilding, spreading kindness over a crack he hoped I never saw. I already knew that the crack had a name, a place, and another woman's hands on his arm. I dropped his phone on the table and his fork froze midair. The screen lit up with our kitchen ceiling for half a second. He glanced from the phone to my face, eyebrows tightening. My hands would not stop trembling, so I laced them together. "What's this?" he asked, nudging the phone closer with one knuckle. "You tell me," I answered, staring straight at him. My voice sounded calm, which scared me more than yelling. He let out a short laugh that did not match his eyes. "Did I miss a call or something?" he tried, lips twitching. I tapped the screen and pulled up the chat with his friend. The top of the thread showed that line about almost going home with her. I rotated the phone and pushed it to his side of the table. Color drained from his face so fast it almost looked fake. His jaw worked while his eyes darted across the messages. He swallowed hard, thumb hovering above the screen, not touching. "You went through my phone," he said, voice rougher than usual. "That's what you're focused on?" I asked, leaning forward. "I read what you wrote about me, about us." My fingertip hit the line about me being a roommate with perks. "You think that's all I am?" I asked, throat tight. He shoved the chair back and stood up fast, almost knocking it over. "That was a joke," he blurted, raking a hand through his hair. "I was venting, guys exaggerate in those chats." His smile flickered on and off, completely out of place. "Almost going home with someone else is not venting," I snapped. The word almost felt jagged in my mouth. "That is a plan that only failed because she left." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. He pressed his palms flat on the table and leaned toward me. "Nothing happened," he insisted, eyes wide, voice climbing. "I didn't touch her," I stopped myself. He sounded like he believed that should earn him a medal. "You did not stop yourself," I shot back, pointing at the screen. "She changed her mind, that is what saved you." The reality of that detail hit me again as I spoke. "If she had stayed, you would have gone with her, right?" His mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. I watched the answer move across his face before he spoke. Finally, he squeezed his eyes shut and nodded once. "Yeah," he whispered, "I probably would have gone too far." Something in me went quiet when he admitted it. I had been bracing for lies, excuses, creative spin. Hearing the truth that plain felt like stepping off a curb I had not seen. I gripped my knees under the table to stop my legs from shaking. He dropped into the chair again and buried his face in his hands. "I hate that I did this to us," he muttered, voice muffled. "I freaked out after that night with you, after you said no." He dragged his hands down and looked at me, eyes shiny. "Don't blame my no for your almost affair," I cut in. "You wanted someone who didn't know you, that is on you." I hated how steady my tone sounded because inside I felt flipped. He winced like I had hit him with something solid. "I felt rejected," he said, tapping the table with two fingers. "Every time you pulled away, I felt unwanted here." He gestured around the kitchen like it was a witness. "I went out for drinks," she laughed at my jokes, it messed with my head. "So you went looking for proof that you still had it?" I asked. "And almost paid with our marriage as the price." My stomach tightened again, high and sharp. "Do you realize that you were gambling with my life too?" He shook his head hard, like he could fling that idea away. "I wasn't thinking about it like that," he admitted, shoulders slumping. "I felt angry, lonely, like I was living with a stranger." His eyes flicked up, waiting to see if the word stranger landed. "I felt like a convenience," I answered, heat crawling up my neck. "At least your stranger got flirting and conversation first." That came out more bitter than I planned, but I did not pull it back. His shoulders hunched as if the words had weight. "I know I messed up," he said, palms open in front of him. "I've screwed a lot of things up, but I didn't cross that line." He swallowed again, throat bobbing, voice low. "I stopped, and that night scared me more than anything." "It scared you," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. His eyes snapped to Annie, desperate for me to understand. "I suddenly saw you walking out, taking everything being done." He shook his head slowly, jaw tight, like the picture still hurt. "You almost slept with someone else, then you suddenly saw me walking out," I said. "Notice how both those scenes still center you." That realization clicked into place while I spoke. "You are terrified of losing me, not of hurting me." He flinched at that and reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back and placed my hands in my lap instead. He stared at the empty patch of table where my fingers had been. His voice dropped lower, almost hoarse. "I am terrified of both," he insisted, eyes shining. "I hate that I made you feel used and disposable." His chest rose and fell faster, and his fingers curled into fists. I swear to you, I never wanted you to feel less than my partner. But you did, I answered, forcing the words out through my teeth. You wrote that I drive you crazy because I barely ever want sex. You described me as a roommate with benefits to your buddy. I could not keep the shake out of my voice on that last part. I was being an idiot, he said, rubbing his forehead hard. Guys talk trash, it doesn't mean we actually believe it. I narrowed my eyes and watched him scramble for a softer story. Okay, I said quietly, so what do you really believe? He stared at the table for a long moment, fingers drumming. When he looked up again, his eyes were red around the edges. I know I treated you like sex was more important than you, he said. I acted like I was entitled to your body, I hate admitting that. Those words landed heavy in the air between us. For a second I could not breathe because hearing him name it did something. It did not fix anything, but it made my experience feel less imaginary. My own eyes burned and I blinked a few times to clear them. He pushed his chair back and walked around to my side of the table. Slow movements, palms out like he was approaching a scared animal. Can I sit next to you? He asked, stopping a few feet away. That tiny request for permission twisted something tight inside my chest. I nodded once, short and stiff. He lowered himself into the chair beside me, not touching. The space between our arms felt wide and fragile. It was strange seeing him act this careful with me finally. When you told me you felt like you only existed to spread your legs, he said. It hit me in the gut, I couldn't shake it. I went out that week trying to prove to myself I wasn't that guy. His mouth twisted as he realized how backward that sounded. By trying to hook up with someone else, I asked, eyebrows lifting. That's your idea of not being that guy. He groaned softly and dropped his head into his hands again. I know it makes zero sense when I say it out loud. A laugh knocked out of me, sharp and humorless. I almost wish you had cheated, I said, staring at the fridge. At least then I'd have something clean to point at. He jerked his head up, horrified. Don't say that, he pleaded, eyes wide. I already replay that night every day, you have no idea. He reached for my knee and stopped halfway, leaving his hand hovering. I look at you and I know I don't deserve another chance. Then why are you still here? I asked, turning to face him fully. Why didn't you confess before I found those messages? It mattered to me, that order, more than he seemed to grasp. He sucked in a breath and let it out slowly. Because I'm a coward, he answered, shoulders sagging. I thought if I just treated you better, this would go away. I told myself it was a close call, not a real betrayal. His face crumpled a little on the last sentence. And when I said no, I prompted, watching his reaction carefully. He nodded, eyes locked on mine now. When you said no, I realized you were slipping away for real. I thought if I lost you after almost screwing up like that, I would never forgive myself. There it is again, I murmured, leaning back against the chair. You keep talking about what you can't forgive yourself for. My brain keeps asking if you even see what you did to me. I knew my voice sounded small, I could hear it. He shifted closer, elbows on his knees, head bowed. I see it now, he said, looking up with wet eyes. I see you doubting every nice thing I do. I see you wondering if this is love or fear driving me. That last line made my chest tighten because it was true. I swallowed hard and looked away to steady myself. So which is it? I asked, thumb rubbing circles on my own palm. Is this a man who loves me or a man terrified of guilt and loss? He sat with that question longer than I expected. I love you, he answered finally, voice low and uneven. And yes, I am terrified, but not just of guilt. I'm scared of going back to the guy in those texts. That guy is you, I pointed out, eyes snapping back to his. He doesn't lay V in another body, he's not some stranger. If you hate him, you actually have to do something about it. My pulse pounded again, but this time it felt like anger and clarity together. I am doing something, he argued, straightening up. I'm reading, I've already looked up therapists, I'll go alone, we can go together. Words tumbled out of him fast and clumsy. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, I promise. Promises used to thrill me, now they just made me tired. Stop saying you'll do anything, I replied, pressing my fingers to my forehead. Tell me what you are actually willing to change in yourself. He opened his mouth, paused, then closed it again, thinking. I'll start with therapy, he said after a beat. I'll talk about why I treated sex like a right, not a gift. He exhaled sharply and scrubbed at his jaw. I'll stop pressuring you completely, no more sulking or guilt trips. And if I never sleep with you again, I asked quietly. That question hung heavy because we both knew it was extreme. He flinched, eyes closing for a second, then opened them again. If that's what you need to feel safe, I'll live with it, he answered. I searched his face for any sign of a lie. He looked wrecked and honest and still very much himself. I don't know if I believe you, I admitted, voice almost a whisper. But I heard you, and that is something. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving mine. I know I don't get to decide how long you need, he said softly. If you walk away now, I deserve that, I get it. He swallowed, then added, I'm just asking for a chance to show you I can be different. My brain fired back a dozen questions about whether people really change. None of them made it to my mouth, they just crashed around inside. Instead, I sat there and listened to his breathing and my own. The future felt hazy, but the lie between us was finally in daylight. He reached out again, slower this time, hand open between us. You don't have to take it, he said, voice unsteady. I just want you to know it's there, and I'm not going anywhere without your choice. I stared at his hand, at the man attached to it, at the mess. Eventually, I placed my fingertips in his palm, just for a second. Not forgiveness, not a full welcome back, just contact. His shoulders dropped with a relief that almost made me angry. Inside, I knew this was not a happy ending, just the start of a much harder question. He stopped at the bedroom doorway and lifted his hand like he was knocking. You still okay sharing a bed tonight? He asked, voice careful. Weeks earlier, he would have just flipped off the light and climbed in. Now he waited on the threshold like it was a border. I'm fine, I answered, even though fine had started to mean nothing. He stepped inside slowly and placed his phone on the dresser. That tiny move mattered because he used to keep it glued to him. I watched the screen face down and felt my jaw tighten. He eased under the blanket and stayed on his back, hands folded. No reaching, no pulling, just breathing beside me. Do you want me to hold you or give you space? He asked. I stared at the ceiling and heard my own heart over his words. Just your arm, I muttered, rolling halfway toward him. He lifted it, waited, then let it fall gently around my shoulders. His wrist rested light against my collarbone like he was afraid to press. My body remembered tension even while my brain registered the change. Tell me if anything feels off, he murmured into the dark. That sentence cracked something in me that I did not show. I lay stiff for a few breaths before letting my muscles loosen. Kindness wrapped around me and still felt edged with panic. The next afternoon, we sat in a waiting room that smelled like sanitizer. He filled out intake forms with tight letters and snapped the pen cap. Last chance to bail, I joked softly because my nerves needed somewhere to go. He looked up and his eyes were wet around the corners already. I am not backing out, he answered, voice low. If anything, I should have dragged myself here years ago. He squeezed my fingers once and let go when the counselor opened the door. Watching him walk in first felt stranger than sitting down after. In the session, he did something I never expected. He said the ugly words out loud before anyone prompted him. I use sex like a way to measure my worth, he told her. I acted like my wife owed me, and I do not like that man. I watched his shoulders shake while he talked about control. About feeling ignored, about pushing anyway, about that night at the bar. The counselor glanced at me a few times to see if I needed a break. I shook my head and kept listening, even when my stomach turned. When it was my turn, I did not sugarcoat things. I learned how to leave my body so he would be satisfied, I said. My brain floated somewhere else so my mouth could say yes. I did not cry until I saw his whole vase crumble. He reached for a tissue box and then dropped his hand. I had no idea you felt that gone, he whispered, facing the floor. It kills me that you had to do that because of me. I believed the pain, I just did not know what to do with it. Driving home, the car was too quiet for a while. He finally cleared his throat and drummed his fingers on the wheel. Thank you for not sugarcoating in there, he said. I needed to hear all of it without you protecting me. I'm done protecting you from yourself, I replied, watching houses blur. He nodded once, knuckles white around the steering wheel. I know, he said, eyes fixed on the road. That is the part that scares me and keeps me going. At a friend's birthday later that month, people noticed the shift. He kept checking on me, bringing drinks, sliding a hand to my back lightly. In the past, those touches meant a countdown toward the bedroom later. Now they looked cute from the outside, and I knew the story underneath. One friend pulled me aside near the kitchen. "You two look amazing lately," she grinned, nudging my arm. "He is on husband of the year behavior, what's the secret?" I almost choked on my drink because the answer was so ugly. Therapy, I managed, forcing a small smile. And some very honest conversations that almost broke us. Her smile faltered for a second before she nodded quickly. "Whatever you're doing, it's working," she said and walked back to the music. Across the room he caught my eye and lifted his glass toward me. That little gesture used to make my chest feel warm. Now my chest felt crowded, heavy, unsure. I lifted my own glass anyway because I was still there. That night in bed he asked before every single step, "Is this okay?" when his lips touched my shoulder. "Do you want to keep going?" when his hand slid over my hip. I answered yes each time, and it was true, and it was complicated. For the first time in a long time, my body did not freeze. He moved slow, watched my face, adjusted when I flinched. At one point he actually stopped and said, "I can pull back now if you want." Nobody understands how wild it felt to hear that in our bedroom. Afterward he stayed facing me instead of rolling away. He brushed hair from my forehead and asked if I felt safe. I stared at him and realized something that hurt in a new way. His best version still lived in the shadow of his near affair. On a random Tuesday, I texted him 3 words during lunch. "We need distance." The second I hit send, my palms broke out in sweat. My phone buzzed almost instantly with his reply. "Are you leaving?" popped up on the screen. No greeting, no joke, just raw fear in 4 words. I stared at that message for a long minute. Then my fingers moved on their own. "I am not packing bags," I wrote, "not yet. I need a weekend alone to think," I added. Dots bounced as he typed and erased and typed again. Finally, one line came through. "Tell me what you need and I will not argue." That answer should have soothed me, but it didn't. It reminded me that he knew exactly how thin his ice was now. It reminded me that I held something I never had before. He booked a hotel for me without being asked. Forwarded the confirmation, then checked in again. "I will stay with your brother, the house is yours," he texted. I stared at the reservation email and felt sick and weirdly powerful. At the hotel, I sat on the bed and opened my journal. I made 2 columns and started listing reasons to stay. Small tender moments filled one side faster than I expected. On the other side, I wrote only a few lines, but they felt louder. "He used me. He almost cheated. He only transformed when he realized he could lose me." I stared at those sentences until my eyes stung. That night he called and let it ring once before hanging up. A text followed right after. "I don't want to pressure you, just wanted to hear your voice." My thumb hovered over the call button and then dropped. Instead, I sent an audio message. "I hear that you're trying," I said, voice shaking slightly. I also hear my own brain asking if this is enough. I ended the recording there, abrupt on purpose. When I got home Sunday evening, he met me on the porch. No big speech, no gifts, no flowers. He stepped aside and let me walk past first. That tiny act would have gone unnoticed before. Inside, the house was spotless and quiet. He stayed by the door with his hands in his pockets. "Do you want me upstairs or on the couch?" he asked. It hit me that he was making no assumptions anymore. "Upstairs," I said, then added, "on your side of the bed." His shoulders dropped with a breath he had been holding. "Okay," he nodded, eyes bright and tired. "I'll follow your lead until you decide what you really want. People like neat endings, you know. They want me to say we rebuilt trust and everything feels brand new. Or that I walked away and found myself again in some bold, clean break. Ray, Al, life did not give me either of those scripts. What I have instead is this. A man who asks before he touches me now. A man who keeps bringing up therapy homework like a nervous student. A man who finally understands that I can walk out. And me. I am the one lying awake while he sleeps beside me, breathing steady. I am the one who feels strangely safer and colder at the same time. I am the one who gets to choose who I want to be with that power. Sometimes I look at him across the room and see 2 versions. The old one who treated my body like a guarantee. The new one who flinches when I reach for my keys. Both live in the same face now, and I have to decide if I can live with that. I have not made a final choice yet, and that is the truest thing I can say. For now, he treats me like I am precious and dangerous. For now, he is careful and loving and a little bit terrified. For the first time, his fear belongs to him, and my answer belongs to me.